It is 3 o'clock, at least here in Sweden. So I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Collaboration, Not Competition. We have some of the most brilliant and creative minds in the industry with us today, ready to discuss. My name is Madeleine Hall, and I'm your host today. I'm acting CEO at Tillberg Design of Sweden. And with me, we have Per Eriksson, that you've met in previous webinars, our Sustainability Director. If you have any questions during this webinar, then please write them in the chat, where Per will be able to see them, and then we can forward them to our panelists. This webinar is, of course, also being recorded, so you can watch it later. But now I'm really proud to introduce our panelists of the day. We have Greg Walton, founding partner and CEO of Studio Dado. His and the studio's passion for cruise ship interior design is really well known and much celebrated. Greg's knack for purposeful design made his transition into hospitality and cruise ships a seamless one, stemming from work in 1989 on the original Crown Princess. Welcome, Greg. It's great to have you. Then we have Lionel O'Hayan, the founder and CEO of iCrave, leading design firm based in New York City. iCrave, they create award-winning work spanning from healthcare to air travel, cruise, and a lot more. Lionel is also very passionate about fostering creativity in the world around us through his work, of course, but also through several non-profit initiatives. Welcome, Lionel.
Thank you.
Then we have Fredrik Johansson, partner and executive director with Tillberg Design of Sweden. Fredrik's interest in beautiful design can, of course, be seen through his work, but also through the many vintage pieces that he owns, from motorbikes to pipes, everything. Being from the country of IKEA, functionality is also at the core of Fredrik's design. Hello, Fredrik.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Nice to see you all.
Chris Finch from AD Associates unfortunately could not make it today. However, today's starting point is the one that he suggested. So together in this virtual room today, we have about 100 years of combined experience. If we instead look back 100 years in time, the Spanish flu and tuberculosis killed millions. And at that time, the Bauhaus Manifesto was created with a design that told a story about clean and hygienic spaces. Looking at history, what can and should be the role of architects and designers in times when standards change? Lionel, any thoughts on the topic?
Thank you. You know, it's a very interesting topic, and it's something that we think about a lot, and especially right now, post-COVID-19. I'm not sure we're post-COVID-19 actually, but thinking about the world post-COVID-19. I think that it's important to imagine what architects' goals have been through the impact that architects have on the way that we live, the cities that we build, and the compulsions and the interactions that humans have. This kind of ebb and flow of society and how we meet and how we convene and how we work and what kind of neighborhoods we choose to have. And I think that the big challenge for architecture today, and it's been probably through the end of the 20th century and now into the 21st century, are there new challenges that architects have to face as ingredients to the work that we do, right? Because if we're going to live, we really need to understand the inputs. And the inputs are different, right? We have different tools. We have different ways that we communicate. We have different systems that humans interact with that aren't built completely in the physical world. So a lot of our work is talking about how our physical and digital worlds are colliding and what the impact on physical space is when we live part of our lives in the virtual world. And one of the things that I think is important for us as a practice, and I speak about this a lot, is to understand our responsibility to include the digital interface into the solution sets that we provide. When a client comes and asks us for a solution, what is our responsibility to them to give a solution that includes the experience of the digital world? For example, if part of your experience of a hotel, your first experience of a hotel will be probably digitally. And your interaction with it for a long period of time, probably longer. Cruise ships is a perfect example. Cruise ships, you might book a cruise ship a year in advance. When we worked on a Disney cruise ship, one of the things that we talked about was how can we get kids who may be reluctant participants, a teenager going on a Disney cruise ship probably has a younger brother or sister, right? And so they're probably being dragged to a Disney cruise ship, and they probably don't want to tell their friends in high school they're going on a Disney cruise ship. But we wanted to figure out as architects, as designers, how can that ship be a filter, a transformational filter, so that they can come on the ship reluctantly and they can leave inspired and more creative because of Disney, because of what Disney does and how Disney thinks. And one of the things that we told them in 2007 was use Facebook and use what was it? What was the big famous meetup? Like what was it called again? The other one. I can't even remember anymore. It was the big social media platform.
Instagram, maybe?
No. In 2007, it was. Anyway, somebody must know the answer. I feel silly that I can't come up with it.
Was it MySpace?
These platforms and introduce the kids on the ship to each other now, so that they don't spend the first day of their 3-day or 7-day cruise, or the first 2 days or 3 days being, shy or cliquey or being in different. MySpace was what I'm talking about, right? It was MySpace. So use those platforms where kids already have a profile to say, hey, these are the people who will be on a cruise ship at the same time as you. They can get to know each other. So when they arrive 6 months later, 8 months later on that ship, they were able to say, oh yeah, hey, we're friends. We've known each other for the last 6 to 8 months. So that's a microcosm of an answer to your bigger question, where it's like we can change people's habits and their ability to interact with each other, right? As designers, the way we think about societies and how we work together. If we start to embrace the technologies around us that can change the experience that people have in place, right? In spaces. And so in one of the things that I was talking about in another discussion earlier this month was we have to make a decision about where we want to come out of this pandemic or this time in society as a group of thinkers, right? And say, this is the group of thinkers that are going to affect change. And we're going to do so because we're going to come up with solutions that are going to answer how society should act in these environments. And it's going to change the way that we think about our hospitals and the way we think about our cities and what it means to be a citizen in the city, right? In America, you don't have a compulsory army requirement, right? You don't have to go to the army for 2 years, like many of the countries in Europe and all over the world. But maybe there's a civic duty that makes you responsible for understanding what your role is in a city like New York if something like a pandemic happens, or your civic duty in the event of unrest, or your civic duty in understanding, instead of a hospital becoming like an emergency center, one of your arena or your schools or your town hall, that those things actually have been pre-engineered to allow for the city to change without disrupting everyone's workflow and how everybody lives. So there are big challenges. What I fear in our world today is that the design community is getting smaller and smaller and smaller in terms of what it believes its lane of authority is, right? And I think that's a dangerous void to leave if big thinkers and big ideas don't come from people who understand in a broad sense that architecture is really about the interactions in the cities we live in, and those connections is not just about the building itself. So I think, just to wrap that up, I think like historically architects have taken central roles in shaping our world and shaping society, and it's super important that people see that as a central part of our community's responsibility looking forward.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Fredrik, your 5 cents?
My 5 cents. I think what Linus said is pretty spot on. I mean, in our pretty unique role as designers and architects, we have the kind of the overview of the bigger picture. We quite often involve as master planners or having the bigger picture in front of us. And by understanding the whole value chain, I think it's essential if we want to do a good job. We can also handle this situation very effectively by looking at everything from start to finish, so to say, in this case, from the guest experience back to the whole value chain, back to, well, profitability in the end. So I think that's our role and our opportunity at this stage. We can take one step forward and become perhaps an even more central player in the projects that we're working in by offering our deeper understanding of this value chain, as opposed to just being interior designers or architects. We can offer so much more through our overview position, so to say. That makes sense?
Yep, certainly.
But, I would like to say one of the things that struck me on this is there's a lot of, I think, opportunities that are being presented to us as architects and designers from this pandemic that we need to open our eyes and sort of recognize that they're being presented. And it really sort of hit home to me, actually, last night. A friend of mine who lives in San Diego was telling me about certain streets that have been temporarily closed to allow restaurants to expand their outdoor seating because of social distancing. And we have the same issue happening here in Miami Beach with Ocean Drive. It's now been closed to automobile traffic to allow all the restaurants to expand. And there's something that's very positive about that happening. And there's an opportunity that that's been presented in front of us as architects and designers to look at the world, like you were saying, Lionel, at cities, and what are things that can be done like that, expanding public spaces to allow, dispersed seating for restaurants, etc. And I think we as architects and designers need to keep our eye not so much focused on I don't want to say the negative aspects that come out of this pandemic of, we got to wash our hands and wear a mask and all of that, but the other kind of opportunities that are being presented. And even from, an environmental perspective and sustainable perspective, there's a lot of things that we're seeing because of the fact that, a lot of us have been for several months now in a stay-at-home situation. And we've all learned, and this is a perfect example of it right now that we're doing, is we've all learned to work at home and communicate using, WebEx, Teams, Zoom, some type of platform. And I was, yesterday when we were talking, joking, it's made me question, why do we need an office? Why do people need to be getting in their cars every day and traveling, an hour or more commuting and adding pollution to the environment? So I think there's things that are right there in front of our eyes, right in front of our faces, that it's being shown as an example of this pandemic that we need to take advantage of and learn. It's teaching. The pandemic is giving us lessons to learn from and opportunities that will change our world for the better.
Well, I think to your point, Greg, that this is just it, right? Like we've been in this, we've created a world, let's call it post-industrial revolution for sure, where traffic was a quagmire that nobody could solve. With all the technology, with all that mankind has developed and evolved, we cannot solve for traffic because we built a convention that people have to work in an environment together on a clock that starts at exactly the same time for everybody and finishes at exactly the same time for everybody. And it would seem a pretty simple problem to solve across the world, but somehow that convention has been so strong that we haven't been able to solve for it. So now I say the license didn't exist to work from home. Like my office, where I was like, yeah, work from home, it's cool, but nobody would do it because culturally, it just technologically, the next morning we had everything, and I was surprised that we were all good. You know, I got a phone call from the studio. Yeah, we're all set. We're ready to go. I was like, we don't have to buy anything. We don't need anything. They're like, nope, we got it. So we've had the technology for a long time. What we didn't have was the license. So now, as a society, we've proven that things can be different. Can it be exactly the way it is now? Probably not, because everyone's kind of stuck at home. So it's different than just choosing to be at home. But I think that the question is, who's going to take the reins and make decisions about what does it look like, right? What is the future look like, and who has the kind of like I don't want to call it the authority, but certainly, you know, Frederick was saying the overview. Who's got the perspective to be able to say, well, maybe what we're learning from this is let's solve for traffic, because work from home could not necessarily just be about the individual work office. It can be a bigger problem solver that talks about the environment, that talks about quality of life, work-life balance, mothers and fathers being able to spend more time with their kids, all those amazing things. And it's right now it's a question of who's going to grab the reins and go with it. You know what I mean? And I think like that's to me, the critical message is like, this is your opportunity, our opportunity to get into that conversation and not be left on the outside of it by actually drawing it and envisioning it. And we have all these platforms to like tell the world, hey, I have an idea, and just push it out there. And I think that that's an important conversation that could be profound. Instead of like, oh, you got hand washing stations everywhere, you know, like we just did a hospital, like, yeah, you gotta wash your hands. At some point, society has to accept that that's a reality about life. You should wash your hands. But that's not, you know, that's not an evolution of society that I think we have an opportunity not to miss.
That's a great point. I think what both you and Greg said, if we get this right, I think we can as a design community and together with all our clients and all the other experts in the field, we can help to make leisure travel possible also in the future, which is what people want after all. They want to get together, they want to go somewhere else and explore the world and all that. And maybe we can help doing that and at the same time, we can turn all these necessary actions that we have to do into an even better guest experience in the end. So, but like you said, you know, Greg, you said you were moving all the seats out on the street, and Lionel, you said, you know, if we could rethink the traffic, the programming of our daily life. So, if you look at the ship as a city, it's imagine you could reprogram some of the daily life on the ship, so you don't get that 25% effect where all the people are moving around on 25% of the ship's space at any one time, but you actually spread them more evenly over the ship, you know, over the day also. Then that would become a better guest experience, and you could probably you wouldn't have to have less people on board. You could possibly even get more people on board, but still have less congestion and less queues and everything.
Yeah, instead of everybody like rushing to the you know, buffet restaurant all at 9 o'clock in the morning, out to, you know, 3,000 guests trying to get in there, spreading, you know, changing how that whole sort of programming of the passengers' daily experience is done. You know, we've been personally, and Dado, talking a lot about even drilling down into the small detail of when you think about the guest stateroom. And really, how do you take the things that we need to do to make the guests feel safer about their travel experience, but not make it in a way that it's sort of in your face, that this is obvious. But what you're saying, Frederick, is exactly that. How do you make it where the guest experience is actually enhanced, but at the same time, it is actually solving an issue with a pandemic or with COVID-19, but the guest doesn't perceive it that way. They perceive it as, wow, this is really cool. This is much different than I expected. We even said, like, in the shower, what if you stepped in the shower and there was a sensor that automatically the water came on at the right temperature and you didn't have to touch the faucet, the tap to turn, you know, the water on or anything like that. you as a guest would perceive that, oh, this is really cool. This is so, different. And it's better for me because I step in, the water comes on at the right temperature, it's there, and I don't have to, think about it. So it's how can we as designers and architects really take these things and use it as a way to enhance the guest experience versus, well, we're, putting signs everywhere, wash your hands after you touch the tap or something like that. It really becomes not in your face kind of thing, but it's really making your experience on board the ship better and more unique and different and something that you really enjoy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And to me, those solutions really fall into three buckets. There's physical solutions, which is like how do you actually design the spaces and does that change? Then there's digital, right? You're seeing digital interfaces that allow people to have keyless entry and pay without touching credit cards and ways that you can leverage existing technology, turn on your faucet, choose your settings, whatever that might be, and wearing some sort of an RFID or RTLS technology so that it follows you around the ship. And then so you have the physical, digital, and then the operational, which is like, what's the experience? How are we going to operate the ship so that, like you said, like maybe we can spread people around, or maybe we can introduce, ship environments that are not like hotel environments on land. It's like, this is a ship. Have we seen a ship that's just completely turned it on its ear and said, well, now you're on a ship, so therefore everything that you knew when you were on land is different. Let's reinvent the whole experience. I would love to be invited to that conversation. But these three things that are like the physical, the digital, and the operational, in their kind of like degrees, are all going to be like the makeup of what that solution is going to be, I think. And I think.
And looking at those three aspects, where do you think architects and designers can have the greatest contribution?
I really, really, really want to encourage people to understand that all three of those are directly important to delivering on the solution that our group of designers and architects should be delivering. If you fall short on any one of those, you're just not doing the full job. You have to be in the conversation. Doesn't mean you have to be all of a sudden hiring digital people, but you have to understand the impact of that into the guest experience, and you have to be part of that conversation from the very, very beginning. I think it's critical.
Greg, you were saying something as well?
No, I was saying exactly what Lionel was getting ready to say, what he just said, that I, said all three. You cannot do one without the other, and to not understand that we have to be working within all three of those buckets, so to speak. It's crucial and it's important, and it's really also helping us convey that message to our clients as well, that it's the earlier they bring us in to help them these kind of solutions, it's advantageous, because there's things that we all bring as experience from other types of projects that we do, be outside of the cruise industry that we're involved in, and things that we're seeing from different building types or different project types, and what's transpiring there that can really inform the process in the cruise design that the cruise company may not be aware that's occurring, outside of their industry.
Yeah, I'll tell you an interesting thing. We just opened a hospital for Memorial Sloan Kettering just in January, and it's a cancer facility. So someone had asked someone there, "What are you going to do to change the way the hospital was designed?" They said, "We're not doing anything." Right? The hospital was designed in an acute environment where the people who are part of the hospital community understand the importance of hygiene, right? They get it because they're either a doctor or they're a staff member, or they're a patient, or they're a caregiver. So just behaviorally, because they understand it, the things that we had done, the hand washing stations and the protocol inside the hospital as it was designed by us and the other architects involved in the project, it's solved. So behaviorally, that group knows. Now you have a group of people going on cruise ships who they need to adopt the behavior from the starting point so that you can get on with the next layer, right? And I think like that's true across society. We'll have to learn certain things that aren't about, putting plastic, walls between two people eating dinner. That's just not viable as a solution moving forward. So I think behavior is a big part of this thing.
Yeah, and I think the thing too is, we're all talking about the current situation. Will all the rules change once there's a vaccine? Most definitely. I'm not going to walk, into my local supermarket and have a plastic barrier between me and the cashier after once there's a vaccine and everyone takes the vaccine. But there is a sort of a cautionary note to all of this that I feel is important, and that is, this isn't the last pandemic we're going to face, and they're going to become more frequent. It's going to become, I think, more of a continued sort of way of life. So with each new one that comes out, there's going to be this period of time until there is a vaccine or until that virus has exhausted its food supply, so to speak, and disappears, that we're going to have these transition times. So I bring into the conversation all the time the cautionary note. Yes, once we have a vaccine doesn't mean we can go back to the way we were, because who knows what comes next. And we've all witnessed in our in a short history, Ebola, SARS, etc. They haven't spread to the point as COVID-19 has, but it's just telling us that there's more to come.
Absolutely. So if we look at the future with or without vaccine, I hardly even dare say without vaccine, but for a theoretical, at least, purpose, which innovations, especially from a cruise perspective, do you think will take a leap, say in the next year or so, and that will be here to stay? Frederick, any input?
I think Lionel has said a lot about technology already, which I think is going to have an important part. We also, the behavioral component is perhaps equally important, and I guess we're going to use technology to change behavior to some extent. Both will have to go hand in hand, I think. So the innovation, the apps and all that is there and will continue to be developed. There's also a lot of surface treatments and stuff you can put on, and there's technical solutions to most things. But we also don't know. I mean, the only thing we know, as Greg said, is that there's going to be another pandemic in a few years. So it's a lot about preventing infections and spreading right now, what we can do at this time, but also make sure we are ready for next time. We're better prepared next time. And so maybe it's less about super point innovation and it's more about rethinking a few things. So if, for instance, imagine this virus would have been completely lethal, like an Ebola virus or something. You would be on a ship and you would have to isolate people completely on the ship from each other, the sick from the healthy ones. Then you would have to isolate people in their own deck or their own fire zone or something. So I guess the ships will have to be designed so that you can, in the future, isolate people completely from each other. For instance, it's probably more about rethinking some of the, let's say, infrastructure and architecture and how we program the daily life and how people move on the ship, how we embark the ship and how we handle the food and how we can maintain some kind of social distancing if we want to, voluntarily social distancing, so to say. I think it's more about that than super advanced innovation. It's more about, rethinking certain things, mindset almost, if you like. So if we change, if we can, by designing things in a clever way, we can change behavior. So instead of, for instance, hiding all the hand wash stations away like we always do because they're ugly in there, we turn them into something sexy. You know, it's a little rinsing ritual. It's something beautiful and sensual. There's a nice fragrance to it, and people, you know, you do it because it's a nice thing to do. It's not because you have to. It's something beautiful. If we can rethink a lot of things like that on the ships, it's more.
Yeah, it's a real quagmire for cruising. I mean, you know, I saw this hospital room of the future that that we didn't design, but had a really interesting innovation in that the sink in the room, which was obviously a touchless faucet, had a red glow. Excuse me, had a red LED glowing. When someone walked in the room, the water would turn on, and it wouldn't turn green until the person washed their hands for 30 seconds, right? And so it shamed you, really. It was like a shaming device. Like, you know, if there's a patient in the bed and the sink's there with a red light and you don't wash your hands, it's kind of like there's this, you know, elephant in the room being like, you know, go turn the light green by washing your hands. And, you know, it's very compelling as a concept about how you use design to compel people to behave in a certain way. Obviously, I agree 100% with you, Frederick. It should become part of the ritual, right? There are ceremonial rituals in different religions that you wash your hands and make a prayer or whatever you do in different ceremonies before you sit down and eat, right? And those are probably partially religious and partially just cultural from people getting sick over thousands of years. But I think that's going to be, you know, we have clients right now that we're going back into projects that we're designing, and we're like, let's make a ritualistic hand washing thing. Maybe it's a Moroccan thing and this beautiful tile and the petals or whatever. We don't know yet. We're still trying to figure all that out for different projects. Having said that, like, you know, I heard a report that people are starting to use their car as this kind of like safety bubble. Right? Like, I'm in my car, no one can get at me, and I can, you know, I can order food from drive-through, and I can like do work in my car, and I'm safe in my car. And it makes me wonder if cruise ships got to turn the perception on its ear that once you're on the cruise ship, everybody on that cruise ship is safe. Like, this is our island, this is our raft, right? And everyone's been through some sort of a screen, and now you're coming to the cruise ship to be safe, not to be exposed to danger. Where, you know, and somehow that I don't know how that shift happens and how the programming or how the onboarding or how the processes work, but you know, there's a hurdle there that I think everyone needs to recognize about the perception of, you know, like, well, what does happen if it's lethal next time? Like, what do you do? I mean, do they use the life rafts and, you know, like start, you know, quarantine? Like, do we have to now build a whole quarantine section of a ship? Like, and does that really feel like a place to relax with your family? So I think it's going to be solved, and I think we're in it right now. One of the things about living in New York is we've been through 9/11, right? There's the New York experience of 9/11 and an American experience of 9/11. It seems that right now there's a New York experience of this COVID experience and then the American experience, and they're different. They're different because the complexity of the cities are different. And if you look at New York, you know, right after 9/11, everyone's like, well, that's it for high rises in New York. No one's ever renting an office over the 20th floor, right? That was like, everybody was certain that commercial real estate in New York was over. Well, from 2002 to 2020 was the greatest prolific build of office space and towers in the history of New York City, right? I mean, the city's just blown up, and people quickly move on once they move on. So I think that while we're in the weeds, we're super lost inside, like, oh my God, how's everyone ever going to cruise again? But I think once this passes, Greg might be right. There might be pandemics all the time, but there really hasn't been one for 100 years. And maybe the next one will come twice as fast, and it'll be 50 years, or, you know, or they'll come in 25 years, or maybe they'll just keep flowing through. So in that regard, I think we really have to understand what's the value proposition of coming on a cruise ship, and how do we help propagate that? You know, how do we as a group of thinkers help answer that question? It's a big one. I think about it a lot.
Do you think about it a lot as well, Greg?
Yeah, it's interesting because you were saying that how to make the ship sort of the safety bubble like the people are with their cars, and thinking about part of the reason that people choose their cruise vacation is destination. And so that brings up an interesting question of as ships travel from destination to destination and you have your guests leave the ship to experience that destination, then how do you ensure when they come back on board that you're keeping that safety bubble? And working through those kind of things. To me, it's a whole interesting conversation about the world in general. At the time 100 years ago when we had the Spanish flu, people did not travel and move about the globe the way they move today. And in the future, people are going to be moving about the globe even on a much vast scale than what we imagine now. And so that's the reason I always say that we have to think about that this isn't the last time we're going to have this experience because of that, where borders, are disappearing, so to speak. And I think we have to think about that. And so when we really started thinking about when the cruise ships start coming back online, especially in the Caribbean, there's, being in the US and thinking about we have a large US market that, comes to Miami and Fort Lauderdale to board a cruise ship in the winter to escape the cold, bitter weather of where they live and go to the Caribbean and have a week of warmth and relaxation. So are these Caribbean islands going to allow ships to come in? Because if all of a sudden you have a ship, the size of some of, like an Oasis of the Seas, for example, where there's 6,000 guests and they, disembark onto this island and there is, the potential that they could bring disease to the island, and that would definitely overtax that small island's healthcare system. So we've been thinking, perhaps when the Caribbean itineraries start coming back in, this is going to be a chance for the private islands of the different cruise lines to blossom and become even more than what they are now. And there's been a lot of investment by the major cruise lines into their islands recently to improve them and really make them a destination unto themselves. But what can be done to even enhance that experience more, to make that it's not, you're not dependent on going to different stops in the Caribbean, that they could go to private islands and then therefore control that sort of safety bubble, as you were calling it, Lionel. So that's even a conversation of operational things beyond what's happening within the ship. It's where what the ship touches that we have to fold into the conversation.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, that is interesting. We think a lot about how to not spread the infection on board the ship or get it on board the ship, but not how to prevent it getting off the ship if it occurs. That is interesting. And the safe bubble aspect, I mean, what do you think? Will there be some kind of certification that this ship has been through the exercise of redesigning and changing things on board, and they have protocols of the crew training and stuff? Will there be a certificate in the future for a safe ship kind of thing?
Who knows? It's very interesting. I know from like personal experience of traveling to certain locations in the globe that there's certain vaccines you have to have, whether it be yellow fever, cholera, etc. Or you can't go there, or if you've been to a country that has say yellow fever, for example. And I just take this from a personal experience. I was going to South Africa, but my passport had a stamp within the last 6 months of going to Brazil. Well, because I've been in Brazil, South Africa required me to have a yellow fever vaccine. So, I have one of those yellow cards that, you have all your vaccine records. Is that going to be the way we all have to travel now? If the day comes that there is a COVID-19 vaccine, we're going to have documented evidence that we've had this vaccine in order to travel or go from country to country, and any other type of potential pandemic that comes along. So I think there is going to be a point that it's going to be sort of almost like with your passport, you have, as an individual, some type of documentation that proves that you've been vaccinated against the following diseases. And that's going to change. It's going to be like airline travel. We've all gotten very used to, you have to go through security. In the US, we have to take off our shoes and do all this kind of stuff. And it's just become normal. It's become, nobody thinks about it anymore. It's just part of the process of traveling. So I think there will be, regulated things that will come out of this, and maybe a vaccine card is going to be one of those things.
So speaking of all these regulations and safety procedures and wash your hands signs all over the ship, how confident do you feel that we will be able to still design a guest experience that makes it worth it anyway, that makes people not really notice everything that's going on, that makes it a really pleasurable experience to still cruise, even though we might have to have social distancing, temperature checks, special passports, and everything else? What do you think? Frederick?
Well, I think it's important that we do approach it from exactly what you said, guest experience. Not approach it from purely a safety point of view, that whatever we do enhances the guest experience. For example, like I mentioned about the shower in a stateroom, that it comes off to the guest as an enhanced or elevated experience from what they had in the past. And it's almost subliminal that it's actually enhancing their safety. That I think that's what you have to approach the design from. Yes, you are trying to make sure that the guest remains safe and well, and the crew remains safe and well on that ship. But to the guest, it's always about an enhanced guest experience that has been improved from the last time they cruised.
That's true. And maybe, so let's assume that there will be a set of requirements that all the ships will have to fulfill somehow. There are certain things you have to have on board or do on board. Then I guess it's going to be up to us as designers, or as in the end, the clients, how well they manage that, maintaining the guest experience and also the profitability. That's going to dictate how well they do in the future. If they can check all these boxes and still have a great guest experience and run a profitable cruise operation, then it's a winner. If not, it's going to lose out in the long run. I think there's no solution that will fit all. There's no very tailor-made for all the brands and the different sizes of ships and everything. So I guess our job is trying to adapt the existing ships that are out there already to the requirements in the best way we can. And maybe that means a plastic sheet between the guest or something in worst case, or the reception counter or whatever. And then we have obviously the ones that we have on our drawing table, and there we have more margin to rethink things and do things depending on how far they progress the project. But the real opportunity, I guess, is for the newcomers, the new players, and also all the prototypes that are coming in the future. There we can really rethink a lot of the stuff that we have discussed. The programming and the infrastructure of the ship and back of house, and how we make the ship better suited for the future, and maybe safer also, and a better guest experience. Yeah.
So we spoke a bit earlier about reprogramming the daily life of the passengers, of the cruise guests. We're talking a bit about technology and other aspects. If you could, without any limitations, change something on the ships today, to match, of course, the COVID-19 situation, but also to make it better, what would you change?
I'm afraid to answer that question. I don't know who I'm going to offend, but look, I think there's an opportunity. This is kind of goes back to our first conversation. It's like, what can you imagine a cruise ship to be? What can you imagine? You know, the cruise ship industry is expanding exponentially right now. And in that kind of expansion are assumptions about what people are going to want, and like basing it on data of what people have wanted, what people will want, new demographics, new group of people, will they even want to be on ships? I mean, I think that, to me, you know, one of the things I'm seeing in this behavioral change from work at home is that people are like, well, I can work at home, right? And therefore, maybe I could change my behavior of how I vacation, meaning maybe I can petition, or maybe my office will change the way that people take vacation, because they'll be like, hey, you can have a work vacation, so go away for 3 weeks, and go away for a month, you know, and you're checking in 25% of your time, or whatever that might look like. It's definitely going to change, and that's going to affect how people vacation. And in order for them to be able to take those types of leaves while they're still connected, they're going to need places where they can stay connected and be away for a longer period of time. So if you imagine that a cruise ship doesn't have the same cycle because people aren't tied to their vacation slots that they have to get back in school and blah, 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 what does it look like if you had a longer tenure or a longer vacation time on a ship? I mean, like, what would it look like, and how would it affect the kind of things that you offer on that ship? And how would you deal with the stuff that people have to do, like wellness or you know, tour people who are doing, you know, small surgeries and, you know, things that they want to do that are not in their regular stream of life. They want to get them done. They want to go somewhere to do it, and sort of clump all of that behavior into like this experience on a ship. And maybe the ships become super pointed in what they're solving for. Instead of them trying to be a catch-all for everyone, this one is a nip and tuck, you know, and it's nip and tuck and work, you know, or whatever. And you start to create these profiles that solve for certain things, and other ones are much more about, you know, education. And, you know, all of that kind of exists in parts in different ships that take on different personalities. But I wonder if there's an opportunity to really see these things as something completely new. And just one thing on the behavior thing, like, you know, I'll reference Burning Man and the kind of 10 principles of this festival. You know, the first one being leave no trace, right? That's a principle that everybody who's been to this festival has understood and takes on as a moniker for their lives everywhere else they go. So a ship can be a place where you can instill new behavior for people because they went on the ship, and make it a positive, right? As opposed to, oh God, I hate going to ships, I gotta wash my hands. And so you learn something about your behavior on that ship that now when you leave the ship for the rest of your life, it becomes part of what you do all the time. And that's a tone and authorship, I think, that I just think that the way that these cruise lines are going to be speaking to people and inviting people to the ship is going to change for sure. I just don't know exactly how.
That's a beautiful idea, I have to say. Let's see, we have about 10 minutes left, and we do have some questions from the people that are listening. Pat?
Yes. See, so you were talking about, or the question is about the design brief. And do you believe that ship operators will include non-touch innovation and improvements for the guest experience? I guess we already answered that one. Another one is about the opportunity for change that we have right now. That right now, when nothing is certain, there is an opportunity to change behavior or perhaps even manage behavior. Could we as designers have any part in that? Or is, I guess, our visionary work, could that be part of managing, designing new behaviors? Or
I mean, I think that's the question is for each person to decide how far they want to reach into their creative selves and affect that change. More than ever, you don't need the structure of publishing, if you will. Like if you have a big idea and you think you want to change behavior, put it out there, and people will react to it. And if it's interesting and it's compelling, it can get picked up, and people can follow the leader on it. And I think people should be encouraged to put their ideas forward. If you're working in the studio, put your idea up. Put your idea up. The person who leads your studio will probably listen. And if you're just putting it up on a Medium publication, or you're throwing it up on social media, or you find a Reddit channel, whatever it is, like get your ideas out there. It's osmosis today. Like ideas move up and down and horizontally, and people pick up on them. So you can affect change. You just have to get it out there.
it's very interesting and promising for the design world, I would say. Have two ways of influencing. Vision is one, specification is the other. So let's see, we have a lot of questions now. There will be a forum for ideas regarding COVID and the user experience. Where can we share relevant information? I don't know who to ask.
The Well organization has a COVID-19 task force, which I took part in, and you can go on Well and participate and add ideas and ask questions, and there's seminars and webinars going on. I think there's a fair amount of health organizations looking for leaders in different industries, looking for thinkers to help solve the stuff. I think every country in some fashion has something going on, so keep your eye out for it. You can start at Well.
Thank you. Here's one. Carnival has announced today that the accelerated disposal of 6 ships from the fleet over the next 90 days. I'm interested to know the speed at which the design community can manage the delivery of rebranding projects that can yield a short-term profit. Wow.
Interesting. Did you get the question, Frederick?
I do. I guess I do. It's about how, from start to finish, how long it would take to take a ship from Carnival and make all the priorities and put up the budgets and get the design approved and then build it and relaunch it. The speed of that, I think, is if we just do a monkey shining, as we call it, you can probably do it in like, I don't know, 6 to 8 months or something. But then it's really superficial, and I'm not sure we can solve some of the pandemic protection measures that we need to think about. So I guess a year is probably more realistic, and considering everything else that's happening in the industry and the yards being pretty fully booked and what have you. So I don't know, what do the rest of you think, Greg and Lionel?
I think the yard.
I mean, we've done some crazy things in refurbishment in record period of time. I mean, I'm just thinking of, Frederick, your team was involved in this as well as us, as well as SMC, Norwegian Joy, converting it to come back from China back to the West. I mean, talk about pulling a rabbit out of your hat. That project was for the owner, for MJM, for all of us as architects. It was extremely fast paced. And I guess for me, that's probably one of the things that I can sort of think about, because that probably is close of an experience rebranding or repositioning an existing ship that could happen now that we've all been a part of. And because it was going from one set of guest cultural preferences back into a different set of guest cultural preferences. And there were venues that were on the ship before that are no longer on the ship, and venues that had to be added. And because of that, there was extensive galley and back of house area rework as well. And it was done in record time. So I personally am up for the challenge because I thrive on that kind of craziness. To me, it's exciting, and when you do make it happen, you're like, boy, I never thought this would come to fruition, and you did it. So I don't know. I mean, I think as long, when you've got the right team in place, and that project was a perfect example. It was, you had 3 design firms that all had extensive experience in cruise ship work, both in new build and refurbishment. And you had a contractor that specializes totally in refurbishment work that all the design firms have had, extensive relationship with over the years. And then we had an owner and their team that was prepared and knew how to manage the challenge. So when you have the right team in place, you can pull those rabbits out of your hat.
It's very true. I guess it depends on to what degree you go into redesigning and reprogramming. And as you said, if you move it from one part of the globe to the other with new preferences for everything, dining and behavior on board, then that's a big operation. And it can be done, but it can be done extremely quickly. But then it comes at quite a price tag as well. It wasn't expensive. It was a pretty expensive refurbishment, I remember. So I guess it's depending on how much money you want to spend at the end.
It's amazing to see the passion in both of your eyes when you're talking about that project.
Because I know Frederick's like me; he thrives on this kind of stuff. It's like it's a challenge. We're like, okay, we're there. We're ready to go for it.
Our self-destructive lifestyle.
Speaking of challenges, let's see if we have one last question, maybe, Per.
Yes. So when it comes to change of behaviors, we are now in a moment where behaviors might be easier to change than normally. And we know that we have the software technology to do almost anything, whereas the cruise ships are rather a functional design where you have dedicated surfaces for dedicated functions. Do you see that we could create the same openness in the hardware of the cruise ship so that it will match, so that we can actually match behavioral change? We still have to fit the guests into the hardware that we are designing.
That's that question might take another hour to answer, but
you have 1 minute, Lionel.
Yes or no?
Executive summary.
The answer is yes, you could, but there's a lot. The cruise ships are, like the metaphor of turning a ship around. It doesn't happen right away. It takes a long time. So someone's going to break something new, really, really new. And this is probably a good opportunity to instigate that. You're hearing Carnival making changes. People are going to change. They're going to have to react. And how far do you go? We ask our clients, what's your threshold for pain? Do you want like change or do you want like change? You know what I mean? So right now would be a time for like someone to say, you know what, with all the ships we're building, we're going to have to take a stab at one of them really taking a different direction and see what that's all about. So yeah, it can happen. It just requires the will of a big group of people coming at it from different angles, from a financial component, from an experience component, from an engineering component, like how is it all going to come together and what does it mean? So we'll get there.
Sounds very promising and a good way to end this webinar today. We are out of time. So I would really like to thank everyone for your participation here today, especially, of course, to our brilliant panelists and visionaries. The webinar has been recorded. The link will be published quite soon on all the normal medias. With that, Per and I would like to say a big thank you, and take care, and see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In real life.